So good morning, everybody. My name is Mary Waldron, and I'm the Executive Director of the Old Colony Planning Council. We are one of 13 regional planning agencies in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but we all have pretty much a lot of the same mission, working with our communities within our region, across our borders, increasing that quality of life. One important aspect of that certainly is the footprint, the footprint of our communities, but the resiliencies, and also just again the conversation about how do we make ourselves a cleaner and greener Commonwealth. I do have a couple of my board members that are joining with me. I have Val Massard, who is the delegate from the town of Kingston. I just want to recognize her. And also I just want to recognize John Costa, who's the alternate from the town of Avon. We do have very active and engaged board members, and appreciate they being on today's meeting, but also to support the mission. I'd also just like to recognize the state delegation as well, and they supporting our mission as well. It just doesn't happen singularly, and again, the support of the programs that not only within the Commonwealth. Particularly, I just want to also then now go into the fact that Senator Markey was unable to make today's meeting, but he did provide some information. As you know, Senator Markey, along with the rest of the congressional delegation, but Senator Markey's Energy Environmental team has open monthly open office hours, and they're open to webinars and municipal leaders. So we'll be dropping the link to that. We'll also be having that information on our website. We'll have a page dedicated to the electric vehicles and green and clean energy. But I do want to just put these dates on there, and that information will be sent out. And if you're interested, they'll be done in the link. So now I get to get into the formal. I was watching David Letterman, and he has the program on Netflix, My Next Guest. And I love that show just because it really is a conversation with folks that just maybe normally doesn't have that opportunity. Today, in that light, we have our next guest, or the panelists that you see here before today. And this is a bit different. When we had our little bit of our pre-session on Friday, I was asking the folks, we have this conversation that happens? And, certainly the utility companies and the state do. But we have an added organization, Green Energy Consumer Alliance, that's joined us today. I've had the honor of knowing Larry Cretion for 40-something years. But his dedication to the Commonwealth and green and clean energy has always been there. But representing that group today is Anna Vandersbeck. And so I just want to quickly go through this. And Ryan Bradley is from National Grid. We have Sean Tully from Eversource, Mark Schreiber from the Department of Energy and Resources, and Zachary Jenkins from Mass Clean Cities Coalition. So with that, I believe I'm going to be turning this over to Paul Umano from our office, just to kind of talk about where again, thank you for the agendas. Thanks, Megan and Elise, the summary of our region, the presentations by the panelists, and then an open discussion. So we're going to be using the Q&A, please. It just helps gather the questions. And if it's not that, then certainly you can be able to ask the questions in the chat. It just makes sure we keep our eye on the chat. So with this, I'd like to turn this over to Paul Umano. And Paul has just joined us just beginning of this year, comes from the city of Brockton, and has joined our team in terms of working as the senior grant specialist. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate the intro. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel discussion today, and hopefully provide you all with some very helpful resources moving forward as you think about electric vehicle infrastructure and all of the resources that are available to you. So just a little bit about the numbers. So I am tasked with managing our Green Communities program. So OCPC currently has a $79,000 REPA grant, or Regional Energy Planning Assistance Grant, that runs through 2025. And essentially we are working with 10 of our 15 communities that are green communities within the region. And this actually includes the town of Marshfield, which we're really excited to have on board with us. Next slide, please. So we have some great panelists here to go into details about the Green Communities Program. But this is just to give you a brief overview of our partnership with the Department of Energy Resources and what is provided through the Green Communities Program. So this includes clean energy projects as it relates to municipal buildings, facilities, and schools. Currently, the spring/fall application is out. We're really excited to be working with our communities on grant applications for that round. Some of the offerings through the grant include some prescriptive energy measures, including traditional energy conservation measures, as well as decarbonization. And of course, EV is a big part of Green Communities, right? And I was excited to be part of the Brockton team and getting an all EV designated grant. I believe it was 2 years ago now. So really excited about that. And then finally, next slide. And so a lot of the work we do with the REPA grant is on working with the communities on their annual reports, final reports, and grant applications to really ease the administrative burden that goes along with writing and administering grants. So it's 100% funded through the REPA program. And we're really, again, really excited to work with our communities on this. And with that, I had made it brief. I'll turn it over to, I believe, Mark and Zach, who will be diving into the details.
And before we get into Mark and Zach, I just want to acknowledge, so we have one member of our team, our Old Colony Planning Council team, Kyle Mowat, who is our first electric vehicle owner. So he is going to be leading our way in terms of the conversation today, but listening about encouraging others on our team to purchase one. So, gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Scribner from the Department of Energy Resources Leading by Example Division. And I'm pleased to join you here today with Zach from Clean Cities, Zach Jenkins from Clean Cities. We're going to be talking about electric vehicles in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth. Before we get into more specific information about the current state of programs and policy in the state, we're going to start off with some grounding in electric vehicle information and charging, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So when we're talking about electric vehicles, there are three basic types of electrified vehicles, and you may hear those terms used interchangeably in the media or in advertising and other places. But really, when we talk about electrified vehicles, there are these three types, and two of them more specifically are more thought of as electric vehicles or plug-in electric vehicles. Most commonly, people think of an electric vehicle as being the number one choice here, a battery electric vehicle. In this case, it is a vehicle that only draws its energy from an onboard storage, the battery, and all of that energy is received by charging it typically from the grid. So that's your battery electric vehicle. However, there is another type of plug-in electric vehicle that is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or PHEV. And it's important to understand the distinction between the two. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicle can operate in just like a battery electric vehicle in that it has a very large battery that plugs into the grid and can run without any tailpipe emissions in its electric mode. However, it has a second mode, has two modes of operation, the other one being the hybrid mode, which works like a conventional gasoline vehicle so the vehicle has an internal combustion engine and a tailpipe. So in some ways, the importance of a plug-in hybrid vehicle is that it is a bridge technology or a barrier removal technology by which someone can choose an electric vehicle that plugs in without of the concerns that might come from choosing an all-electric or battery electric vehicle. And finally, the third type of electrified vehicle is a hybrid electric vehicle. And sometimes there is some confusion between hybrids and plug-in electric vehicles. A hybrid electric vehicle is really still a 100% gasoline fueled vehicle. And that's important to understand. It does still have a battery, a small battery, and electric motor or electric motors. However, it's drawing all of its energy from gasoline. It's just using that more efficiently. So most of our focus on policy is to shifting towards those first two types of vehicles, the battery electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, because of their zero tailpipe emission capability. And there's a fourth type of vehicle that we're not really going to be talking much about today, but it is coming in the future. It is not really available for sale in the Northeast right now. They do have them for sale in California, and that's the fuel cell electric vehicle. Happy to take some questions on that, but I'm not going to be going into anything more about that on these slides. Let's move on to the charging slide. In order to operate a plug-in electric vehicle, EV charging is required. It's how the vehicle is fueled. It's a new way of fueling a vehicle. And there are three types of charging. You may have heard talk about fast charging. And there are actually three types: level 1, level 2, and level 3, which is the DC fast charging. Level 1 charging isn't really much different than how appliances are used in your home. It is using that same plug and that same outlet, type of outlet that you plug in house. At about 3 to 5 miles of range per hour of charging. And you can see that the connector is that standard plug right there that the charging unit, the charging connector, plugs into. On the other end is a different standard connector that goes into all the vehicles. And right now that is the J1772 connector, which was established about 15 years ago as the standard. Nearly all electric vehicles do come with, at a minimum, an adapter cord that will allow you to charge the vehicle level 1 at home, an outlet in your garage or the side of your house, or any electrical outlet. More and more, they're coming with connectors that will also do level 2 charging. And talking about level 2 charging, that is also a household standard. It's a 240 volt standard. So if you have an electric clothes dryer or an electric stove at your house, that type of appliance is using the same type of circuit that level 2 charging. Level 2 is widely considered standard for most electric vehicle charging because it does strike a balance between the power and the speed of the charging and the cost and the complexity that occurs if you have to install fast charging. There are a variety of connectors and plugs and outlets that are used with level 2 charging. The J1772 connector is still the standard that goes into the vehicle. And at home, if you're installing a level 2 station, you may be using one of the connectors you see at the bottom, the plugs, which are similar to what a clothes dryer or electric stove uses. Tesla, for its vehicles, uses this Tesla connector, which has been rebranded as NACS, or a North American Charging Standard. And the industry and all vehicles and stations are now moving towards that as a standard through the rest of this decade. So J1772 will gradually be phasing out, and this Tesla connector, or North American Charging Standard, NACS for short, will become the new standard for all vehicles and charging stations. We expect by around 2030. And when you're charging at level 2, it can add around 20 to 25 miles of range per hour of charging. And the benefit here is practically any vehicle, if you take it home and charge it at home with level 2, the car will be completely recharged by the next morning. However, if you're charging in the public, more than a few hours might not be convenient. And this is where DC fast charging comes in. DC fast charging uses much higher power. It's 480 volt 3-phase circuit is required. And it adds hundreds of miles of range, often in 30 minutes or less. It uses right now these 3 different connectors. And as I mentioned, the Tesla connector is becoming the standard. So these 2 fast charging connectors, the CCS and the other one here, which is sometimes called CHAdeMO, are both going to be phasing out and moving towards the Tesla connector. through the rest of its decade. DC fast charging is the preferred type of charging. Of course, if you're taking a long trip and you only want to do a rest stop or a meal stop and have your vehicle recharged, usually up to around 80%, and then you're on your way. It's also popular for community hubs where people might live in multi-unit dwellings and want to have something more similar to a gas station experience to be able to charge their vehicle because they don't have access to charging at home conveniently. And happy to take more questions from any of the panelists as we get to the Q&A at the end. So let's move on to our next slide. Talking about our statewide targets for electrification, the Commonwealth is committed to achieving net zero emissions in its economy by 2050 and adopting greenhouse gas emissions limits and sector subspecific limits. And this is highlighted in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050, or CECP for short. There's a broad suite of specific goals, strategies, and policies and actions by sector. Talking about the transportation sector, we want to see 97% of light duty vehicles electrified, and that's around 5 million, and 93% of medium and heavy duty vehicles, so that the trucks are also electrified, non-emitting. And so the Commonwealth is operating its applicable policy and programmatic decisions around these CECP sublimits when it comes to our transportation goals. Next slide. And if we look at the programs and policies in the Commonwealth on a very high level here, they include zero emission vehicle rebates. We'll be talking about this, the More EV program, for example. EVSE, term electric vehicle supply equipment, the technical term for charging stations. There are charging station incentives in the state, and this is an important part to develop the equity in workforce efforts, battery storage, and related EVSE integration. There is the Mass Fleet Advisor Program with its goal to help particularly medium and heavy duty fleets to be able to accelerate and electrify their larger vehicles. Grid modernization is going to be a key element to ensure that there is the capacity and that there's the grid resilience to be able to charge the vehicles and provide the mileage that's going to be needed to adopt all of these vehicles. EVSE planning has really come to the forefront in the last few years, particularly with the NEVI program. And I think there's some sort of audio issue going on. Is everyone able to hear me all right?
There is, Mark, you were kind of fading a little bit in and out, but please continue.
Okay. How is it right now? Is it a little better?
It is. Thank you.
Okay. Mhm. And so in terms of EVSE planning, there is the infrastructure that's going to be required for the public and for fleets to be able to serve all the vehicles that are going to be required to meet the 2050 goals. The efforts that the Commonwealth is undertaking are well aligned with the leader in this space, which is the California Air Resources Board in the state of California, who've helped establish the ACC2, which is short for the Advanced Clean Cars Rule, and 2 means it's the latest rule that was passed in 2022, as well as ACT, which is short for the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule. So a number of states are aligning their policy efforts, including Massachusetts, with what the state of California is doing. And as I mentioned previously, the 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan is where this framework is established to help us lay out the next steps to be able to achieve these goals. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Zachary Jenkins, who's going to talk about the Green Communities Program.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here on this webinar. My name is Zachary Jenkins. I am the director of the Clean Cities Coalition here with the state of Massachusetts. So I'm going to go through a couple of the programs that we currently have active right now. The first one being the Green Communities Program. OCPC did talk a little bit about that earlier. But essentially, the Green Communities Division will provide grants, technical assistance, and support from regional coordinators to municipalities within their region and help them reduce energy use and cost by implementing clean energy projects in their buildings, facilities, and schools. Any municipalities that are brought into the Green Communities Program and designated as a green community have to meet 5 qualification criteria, and a couple of examples of those are to create an energy reduction plan to reduce your energy usage by 20% over the course of 5 years, as well as adopt a fuel-efficient vehicle purchase policy. There are currently 351 municipalities in the state of Massachusetts, and 291 of them have been designated as green communities already. Next slide, please. So this is a brief breakdown of the Clean Cities Coalition. Our Massachusetts Clean Cities Coalition is part of a partnership with the Federal Department of Energy, and we are housed within the Department of Energy Resources. It's a little confusing the way that they want us to break that down, but essentially I am a state employee. I work for the state of Massachusetts, and I work to fill both the guidelines the federal and the state government institute when it comes to alternative fuel vehicles. Our coalition's goal really is to advance the energy security, environmental prosperity, and economic prosperity of the Commonwealth through collaborations with stakeholders across the state. And essentially what I'm doing is I assist public and private stakeholders, as well as individual consumers, fleets themselves, whoever's really interested in their efforts to adopt an alternative fuel vehicle. And I will do that through incentive and rebate assistance, really explaining the way these programs work and how they stack with each other, disseminating educational information and combating the misinformation we see out there relating to these vehicles. And lastly, event facilitation and participation, similar to what we're doing here via this webinar, but also doing things like in-person tabling and helping plan larger electric vehicle or alternative fuel vehicle related events. Next slide. All right, and we're going to break into our vehicles section here. Correct. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Mark with the LBE team and DOER to keep discussing the More EV program.
As I mentioned in the overview slide, Massachusetts has incentives for electric vehicles, and this is through the More EV program. First, we're going to talk about the light duty More EV rebates. And More EV stands for Massachusetts offers rebates for electric vehicles. There are 3 different categories of rebates available right now for light duty vehicles: the standard, used, and plus. The standard rebate is $3,500 for eligible battery electric vehicles. So it is only for that first type of vehicle that we talked about in the electric vehicle information slide, all electric or battery electric vehicle. Fuel cell vehicles, once they come onto the market, would also potentially be eligible for this rebate. The rebate program was updated last year and now also does include used battery electric vehicles. This is an income qualifying program, unlike the More EV standard, where income is not part of the qualification. For the used rebate, there is an income qualification component. But it also is $3,500, which is very generous. And the More EV Plus is not a separate rebate, but actually is an adder for someone who has received either the More EV Standard or the More EV Used rebate. And it's an additional $1,500 if there is an income qualifying resident that meets the standards required for that adder. So that stacked together is up to $5,000 off a new or used EV. And finally, there is also a rebate adder for a specific trade-in vehicle. It needs to be an eligible internal combustion engine vehicle, or ICE for short, and meet the requirements similar to the previous Cash for Clunkers type programs you may have heard about in the past. So that increases the total stacked rebates just from the state programs to be up to $6,000 off a newer used EV, which is really competitive, really generous compared to other states and what's going on. Another part of the program that was expanded last year that is really critical to increasing adoption and reaching the mass market of consumers who purchase vehicles is the engagement and connection with the auto dealerships. And this means that several of these rebates, in particular, the More EV standard, is available at the point of purchase or lease through the participating dealerships. So whereas the year before last, it was a post-purchase rebate and it had to be filed for after the fact, online or sent in, and the driver would receive the rebate after a time as a check. These rebates can be taken as a point of sale discount on the purchase or lease. And this is really making a difference in the ability to deliver these rebates to drivers and to have the auto dealerships as an engaged part of the process. And we want to make a note here, and I think it should be obvious based on how I described this rebate, but it's really an important piece. As Zach mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation or confusion around EVs, and sometimes that's in the area of incentives. So down here in red, we wanted everyone to make a notice that the More EV program is a rebate. It is not a tax credit. It doesn't have anything to do with a state tax return. And we want to make sure that message gets out there so that people are aware they can take it at point of sale. They can apply for it immediately after they purchase the vehicle. However, they do not want to wait until tax time to do that. Next slide. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center also has, or MassEC for short, also has a school bus program that is providing advisory support and helping with deployment for electrifying school buses. This includes free electrification for up to 25 fleets and includes preparation for districts to access additional future funding opportunities. It covers feasibility designs and financial models and procurement plans. And it's available to municipalities or also to those third parties, those bus management companies that manage school bus fleets on behalf of districts. There is up to $2.5 million in ARPA funding available for 1 to 3 school bus fleets as part of the deployment. There's optional technical assistance for guiding the deployment process for the school bus, and charging station planning, which is a critical part to determine where the bus's depot is going to have charging infrastructure deployment, and to collect data to make sure that the employment of the bus is going effectively. In addition to the light duty rebates, More EV also has pickup truck and medium and heavy duty rebates available in this space. The More EV Trucks program is only a post-purchase rebate. It is for battery electric vehicles and potentially also fuel cell electric vehicles. And it is for individuals, but also companies and public entities. So it's got a different criteria for who's eligible. The rebate amounts, the base amount is for the electric pickup truck class or electric van class, which is sometimes called 2B, and that's $7,500 rebate. As you go up in class, the amount of the rebates increase, such as class 3 is $15,000, and as you get to the larger classes, it goes all the way up to class 8, up to $75,000 per vehicle. There's also a 10% rebate adder for operating in environmental justice communities. And for these larger vehicles, for the class 3 through 8, the rebate is reserved through a voucher process. That rebate can be reserved up to 12 months in advance for these larger heavy-duty vehicles because of how this industry works in terms of planning and procuring vehicles. There's sometimes a delay between when the vehicle's ordered and when it can be delivered in the supply chain. So this voucher process allows organizations to plan by getting a voucher and knowing that they're going to be able to get that vehicle delivered some months down the road and be able to take delivery and then apply for reimbursement from the funding for the More EV Trucks program. Next slide.
Hey everyone, so I am going to hop back in and talk about the Mass EVIP program. So Mass EVIP is funded through the Department of Environmental Protection here within the state and is a rolling grant for municipalities, state agencies, and public higher education institutions to get electric vehicles. Now, it is up to 25 vehicles per entity. These vehicles do have to have a purchase price of $60,000 or less and a gross vehicle weight of 10,000 pounds or less. The maximum incentives you can see per public fleet vehicle are $5,000 to $7,500 for a battery electric vehicle and $3,000 to $5,000 for a hybrid electric vehicle. Now, there are a couple steps here that will need to be taken into consideration when you're applying for an EVIP program. You will need to have a funding letter received prior to the vehicle order. If you're using VEH 110, the DEP will pay the vendor on a statewide contract directly after receiving the documentation. EVIP funds cannot be combined with funds obtained through the More EV or Green Communities programs for a single vehicle. Another way that we say this a lot is they're not allowed to stack in that way. You do have to commit to providing internal or external funds to cover any remaining vehicle costs and upkeep for the next 3 years and agree to help promote EVs. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go through the Green Communities grants in relations to vehicles. Grants vary pretty dramatically by technology and whether a vehicle is purchased or leased. Your higher maximum grant funding for these communities that meets special eligibility requirements. So then if you see the chart below, you'll notice the different variations in funding based on the type of vehicle and whether you're considered a specially eligible community. So as an example, with your light duty hybrid electric vehicle or photo hybrid electric vehicle fleets, you'll get $3,000 to $5,000 through Green Communities. And then if you're a specially eligible community, it's $6,000 to $10,000. Keeping going on, you'll see light duty fleets for battery electrics, $5,000 to $7,500, and then special communities, $10,000 to $15,000. And finally, your medium and heavy duty fleet battery electric vehicles, $10,000 to $15,000, and special communities, $20,000 to $30,000. A lot of this is available through the Green Communities website, so please don't feel like you need to rush and write all this stuff down. It will be available for you in a different space. Next slide, please. Perfect. So now we are going to go into Fleet Advisory Services, and I will hop off the call.
Thank you, Zach and Mark. And before Ryan, before we jump in, there are a few questions. So, right, there was a lot of information just was given to you. You know, the technical part about the different kind of electric vehicles, and then talking a little bit more about the different kind of fleets, right? The commercial, and so a whole lot of information. Please take a look at the chat. There's some great links. But John Costa from the town of Avon, he had a couple questions. So first question was, why is DCFC not recommended for predominant charging? Does it damage?
I don't mind. Yeah, Mary, I don't mind taking that one. I did
Thank you,
read it
Ryan.
quickly. So no, it typically doesn't damage the battery. That was kind of a thing with, I would say, EV 1.0. So those Nissan Leafs back in the day, you did see some battery degradation due to increased charging speeds. The BMS systems got pretty good, and now you'll kind of see it as charging curves come out. The faster you charge, usually it'll drop you down significantly as the battery starts to heat up to prevent that degradation. So that's not usually the issue. It's just the power demands of a DC fast charger versus a level 2 charger doesn't always make sense from the point of view of putting it in, especially if you have a place with like a longer dwell time. A level 2 charger is just going to be a better alternative for that versus like highway corridors where DC fast charging is the right decision there. So it more depends on dwell time. It's not really too much on the battery degradation side.
So thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. And there may be some other questions when we get to the end, but the other was a question about the environmental justice community. I know if, I don't know if anybody was going to answer that in the next segment or would like to answer it here.
I don't mind taking that as well. So state of Massachusetts publishes a map of EJC areas or environmental justice communities. So it's different criteria that qualify, like there's an income base, there's a minority base, and there's several other ones outside of that. If you go onto the website, which we can drop in the chat, you can just go on and you can Google the address and it'll show you if it is an EJC area. As far as National Grid and Eversource are concerned, we're going to have differing amounts of incentives available to each of those different areas. So for instance, if you're a low income EJC, we have 100% incentives available for most of those areas. Versus if you don't qualify for either of them, a lot of the times it's at 50%. So it is important to make sure before you actually apply.
Thank you, Ryan. And I did drop the link into the chat for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts link. So, so thank you. These are some quick, questions as a follow-up. Again, all this information either in the chat is the information. So next, I believe that we are going to go
It is
to
me.
Oh, there we go, Ryan. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I'm Ryan Bradley with National Grid. I'm the EV ambassador for National Grid, and I work on all the programs, which Sean will go on over a little bit later. But I just wanted to start out with our fleet advisory services. So for fleet advisory services, National Grid uses a third-party contractor, in this case being ICF, which is a very, very large consulting firm that focuses almost completely on climate. To be eligible for these reports, you have to either be a school district, a bus fleet, a regional transit authority, a government fleet, or typically one that we get a lot of questions of are if you're a school fleet that uses a private contractor, say Beacon Mobility or something like that, to run your buses and own your buses, can they apply for it? And yes, they can. They are still considered a public fleet through this program. What it is a complete comprehensive fleet electrification guide, and it's at no cost to the participants. So both National Grid and Eversource do cover 100% of the cost of this program as of today. All that you're on the hook for as the city or the school district that you would be looking to do is a time commitment. So 5 to 10 hours is typically what we see. As far as National Grid is concerned, we have 107 of these reports in progress already, and we have another 168 remaining to do. So if you're interested at all in the program, please do ask some questions at the end of this. If you could just move on to the next slide. And what are you getting from the program? So this is going to be a complete fleet assessment of your current fleet, your ICE vehicles. And it's going to tell you things like total cost of ownership when transitioning from an ICE vehicle over to an electric vehicle, what that difference is going to be. Typically, it's going to be lower. What there's a like for like of. There's some vehicles in your fleet where there's really not a good alternative yet in the electric form. So it's going to tell you all that. So you're not trying to look through every one of your vehicles. You're just being very careful about which ones you do switch over. It's going to tell you what that impact of these new vehicles is going to be to your fleet, because it is going to have a big impact on it. It wants to make sure you're aware of that. You're also going to get an interactive dashboard to help you assist you on planning these vehicle purchases. So obviously you have a ton of vehicles in your fleet. Those vehicles have different shelf lives as far as the amount of time they're usable for. Through this dashboard, it'll help you prepare for all of that and get ready for those purchases when those vehicles do get to the point where they're ready to be sunset. And finally, as part of the report, you're getting yearly refreshers on the report. You're getting one-to-one technical assistance, monthly newsletters, resources. And something that we see not many people taking advantage of is the office hours. So you can drop in with ICF, ask them any questions that you need to ask them, and just really be sure that you're getting ahead of all of these things as it's progressing forward. That's it for my slide, but if there's any questions, happy to answer those at the end of the call. Thank you. And you can move on to the next slide. Sorry about that.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'll jump in here to shift us slightly from the state focus to talk about some of the federal incentives. This is just a quick slide to say hi. My name is Anna. I work for a private nonprofit called Green Energy Consumers Alliance. This is our team, and we have lots of different programs that help people access clean energy technologies. And then we also do advocacy at the state level. And I focus on electric vehicles. So that's why I'm here, but we can jump to the next slide. I am going to talk here about the federal tax credit for electric vehicles. If you hit next, there's some animations, of course. I'm going to talk both about the tax credit for individuals and the tax credit for commercial entities. And this is a heads up that even if you work for a municipality, you can take advantage of these tax credits, even if you're a tax exempt entity, and I'll go over that. So I'll go over these incentives. I will warn you that this gets complicated very quickly. And if you want to talk offline about how to educate folks in your community about these incentives to make sure they understand them, I'm happy to do that. But I'll go over it relatively quickly. So if we go to the next slide, I'll start with individuals. So for individuals, there's a clean vehicle credit, both for new vehicles and for used vehicles, but I'll start with new vehicles. So for new vehicles, the amount is up to $7,500 on eligible vehicles. And vehicles are made eligible by meeting certain requirements that I'll go over on the next slide. The credit is valid through the end of 2032 for battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles. So this is slightly different from the More EV rebate that Mark just talked about. The More EV rebate is limited to fuel cell and battery electric vehicles. For the federal tax credit, there are still some plug-in hybrids that qualify. Very crucially, you can claim this tax credit as an individual at the point of sale at a participating dealership, basically as money down, or you can, for whatever reason, choose to claim it when you file your taxes. Either way, you have to purchase from a dealership that is registered with the IRS. So basically, dealers can register with the IRS to be able to access these credits through an online portal, and you need to make sure that you're going to a dealership that's registered for that if you're purchasing an electric car. And then there are income requirements for this tax credit. So for individuals, it's $300,000 for joint filers, $225,000 for heads of household, and $150,000 for individual filers. So your income has to be under that limit to qualify for this federal tax credit. On the next slide, we'll talk about those requirements. I will say that you do not need to memorize these. You can just find a list of vehicles that qualify. But for your information, these are the requirements. So the first one, if we click, something should be popping up here. There we go. Thank you. Feel free to click through all the things on this slide. It should be 3. Yeah. So to qualify for the federal tax credit, a new vehicle has to be assembled in North America, and you can check that with the vehicle identification number, or you can basically, the dealer can tell you at the dealership. The MSRP, or the manufacturer's suggested retail price, has to be under a certain limit. So for SUVs, vans, and pickup trucks, that limit is $80,000. For sedans and hatchbacks, it's $55,000. One thing I want to stress here is that this is an MSRP price cap, not a final sales price cap. So if you have a vehicle where the MSRP is under $55,000, for example, but you decide to splurge and get, I don't know, some sort of special paint job or something that brings that limit over $55,000, it's not the final sales price that matters, it's the MSRP. And then the third set of requirements have to do with the vehicle's batteries. There are very complicated and strict requirements, both about the minerals in the batteries and then the components in the batteries. Basically, the vehicle has to meet number 1 and number 2 on this list. And then if it meets both battery requirements, the amount is $7,500. If it only meets one, it's $3,750. And if it doesn't meet either, then it's 0. So again, you don't need to know what these requirements are. This is just to explain what the complicated formula is on the back end, but you can find just a list of vehicles that qualify and figure out which vehicles qualify for what. If we move on to the next slide, there is also a parallel tax credit for used cars. Here, there aren't all those complicated battery requirements because it would just be, quite honestly, too much to track. There is a list that you can access online of qualified models. But basically, the amount is $4,000 or 30% of the sales price, whichever is lower. Again, you have to purchase from an IRS registered dealership. There is a tool called KeySavvy online where you can basically buy a vehicle from an individual through this sort of third party, and that third party, KeySavvy, is registered as an IRS dealership. But if you do this, you do not qualify for the More EV rebate because there you have to purchase from a Massachusetts dealership. To qualify for this used car federal tax credit, the vehicle has to be at least 2 years old and cost less than $25,000. It only applies on the first resale after August 16th, 2022, which is when the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law. And the income threshold to qualify is basically half of what it is for new vehicles. So for joint filers, it's $150,000, individuals 75, and heads of household, it's 112. So again, both new and used vehicles get a federal tax credit. You can qualify for that federal tax credit at the point of sale, as long as you're at an IRS registered dealership. If we go on to the next slide now, there's one sort of loophole almost that I want to bring your attention to, which is if you lease a vehicle, you don't personally qualify for that federal tax credit, but the leasing agent qualifies for a commercial vehicle tax credit. And that commercial vehicle tax credit does not have the same complicated requirements that the individual one does. And so what's happening is that a lot of automakers are claiming, or that basically their leasing arm is claiming that commercial vehicle tax credit and then passing the value of that tax credit on to consumers. So you might be seeing ads that are like a $7,500 lease rebate. That is likely the federal tax credit being passed along. So if you have your eye on an EV that for some reason doesn't qualify for the federal tax credit, you might want to consider leasing. If we move on to the next slide, I'll talk about commercial entities, and this is where this makes sense to think about for your municipality. So sorry about the animations again, feel free to just make all the bullet points appear. Basically, there's a parallel for the federal tax credit I just talked about, but specifically for commercial entities. That was again instituted by the Inflation Reduction Act. The amount is 30% of the sales price or the incremental cost, and that is capped at $7,500 for vehicles that are under 14,000 pounds and capped at $40,000 for vehicles that are over 14,000 pounds. This is a tax credit that's obviously available to private commercial entities, but it's also available to tax exempt entities via direct pay or exempt pay. And you can find out more about how to actually do that online, but this is basically just a heads up to say, if you're thinking about a purchase for your municipality, this is one incentive that you can take advantage of, which before the Inflation Reduction Act existed, you wouldn't have been able to. And I think that is my last slide for now, unless I've forgotten something. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna say that was a lot of information, Anna, but it's, again, things that are on the tip of the minds of folks, either whether you're a residential or private property owner, or as you mentioned about the community. So lots of great information. So we're now heading into charging.
Hi, everyone, back again with charging, and we're going to go through the Mass EVIP charging incentives. Obviously, there's a lot of information on this page. The links will be sent out to you afterwards, so you can take a look as opposed to trying to write it all down now. There are three kinds of charging that are really brought up when you think about Mass EVIP. It's public access charging, workplace and fleet charging, and then multi-unit dwelling charging. So for public access charging, up to 100% of your eligible costs at government-owned locations can be funded through the program. Sites do have to allow practical access at least 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. The charging infrastructure must be hardwired level 1 or level 2 charging, and they do have to be ADA accessible and meet ADA design requirements. Excuse me. Now, for workplace charging, up to 60% of those eligible costs will be covered. You have to have at least 15 employees on site at that workplace, or where your workplace site needs to be where your fleet vehicles are garaged if they're not garaged at your place of business. You do have to have a hardwired level 1 or level 2 charging. They will need to be ADA accessible design requirements for workplace charging. And you must get a fleet vehicle within 6 months if you do not have one already to access workplace fleet charging. Finally, we have multi-unit dwellings. Now for multi-unit dwellings, this again covers up to 60% of those eligible costs. Multi-unit dwellings with 5+ units or campuses with at least 15+ students on site must have equal access. Hardwired level 1 or level 2 charging, same across the board, and it does have to meet ADA design requirements. Next slide, please. And now for the Green Communities Grants Program, the Green Communities Program does have one grant for public access or fleet EV charging, and they will give up to $7,500 per charging station. Next slide. Okay, and what you're seeing here are just some program websites and contact information for myself, Mark Scribner, as well as Lisa Sullivan, who is the Southeastern Regional Coordinator for the Green Communities Program that works in the territory that OCPC also covers.
All right, great. Now I think it's over to me. My name is Sean Tully. I'm the manager of electric mobility for Eversource. So I'm going to talk about some of the utility incentives that we have available for charging for both commercial residential customers in Eversource National Grid's electric service territory. So back in end of 2022, the utilities received approval from our regulators for another phase of our Make Ready programs. So to describe those for you here, these basically break down into three customer segments. So the first, commercial industrial segment, this would be looking for public, destination, workplace, municipal charging for level 2 and DC fast chargers that we talked about before. We have rebates available that will cover 100% of the utility side Make Ready. So any service upgrades that are needed, transformer upgrades or new service. We also have the ability to incentivize up to 100% of the customer side electrical distribution. So that would be, switchgear, panels, conduit, wire, bollards, protective bollards for the equipment, and everything to make the site ready for you to be able to purchase a charging station and bolt it down. Additionally, there are some rebates available for public, environmental justice, which we mentioned earlier, and some other customer verticals that would have rebates for the charging stations themselves as well. And then lastly, since there is a requirement that these are smart communicating charging stations, that folks will, when they go there to charge, they'd be able to start a session and reserve the ports and things like that. We do also have a network service provider stipend that would go for the first 4 years of the program. That's per port, and that would help defer some of the costs, those soft costs, ongoing soft costs for that connected charging station. So we talked about the Mass EVIP program in green communities a little bit before. An important thing to remember in engaging with the utility programs is there is a third-party funding requirement. So the customer would need to seek out and apply for any available third-party funding, such as the Mass EVIP program. And then the utilities would adjust their incentives accordingly based on some other grants that are available. So moving on to the residential segment, this is the most important, where this is where the majority of people are really going to do a lot of their charging. So we have incentives to set up this wiring system and get the charging station set up at your home. So this would be for single family homes and anything that's a multifamily from 1 to 4 units. If it's typically more than 5 units and above, if it's like multifamily high rise or larger apartment building, that would go through the C&I segment as a large multifamily building. But the residential segment, big key here is if your parking area, where you park is fed off of a residential service and has a residential account with utility, that would go through that residential program. The utilities also have some off-peak charging rebates and managed charging programs that are live now and being developed that would help you get additional incentives for charging at home for off-peak times that are more beneficial and less stressful to the electric system. So lastly, there's our fleet segment. So we talked about the fleet advisory services, which really operates as a study to figure out how are you going to transition your vehicles. And then coming out of that fleet advisory services, we do have, similar to the C&I segment, very similar in incentive structures where the upfront utility incentives, so transformers, those kind of things, poles and wires would be 100% covered. And then there's up to 100% of the electrical distribution and some rebates for the charging stations as well. So we could go on to the next slide, please. So going into a little bit more detail here on how this exactly looks and what's owned by the customer. So you see moving from left to right, the utility service, the utility transformer. So that is covered by the utility, and then moving over, going into the metering point, any additional transformations needed, the distribution panels, customer switchgear, trenching, all that would fit into that middle piece under the customer side infrastructure. And then the EV charger that would be purchased by the customer, and there's some other things in here that would be covered as well. So I do see like there might be some slight differences here. I'm looking at this slide. We do cover bollards and a few of those things, so we can clarify that for you. So then I think I have one more slide here that talks about how customers and contractors would engage with the utilities. So there's a few different touch points or some pricing and engage with the programs. There'll be an initial proposal for the design and pricing that'll get reviewed from the utility. Utility will pre-approve the project on the commercial side, and then once the project is complete, you'll submit that invoicing, any third-party funding that was received, any backup for that, and we'll calculate that final incentive and get that to you upon the project completion. On the residential side, you'd work with your electrician, get that work completed, and then work through the utility to upload that, and then you get reimbursed for that electrical work at your home. So bit of a difference there. Commercial customers would pre-approve those projects just because of the higher dollar amount. On the residential side, up to $700 for that residential wiring. That would be a rebate that you would do after the fact, after you work with your electrician to get that work completed. So largely, commercial customers will submit that intake application. There's a few different pathways on the Eversource side, versus we have kind of a standard design that's available for customers if they'd like to use that. But a lot of customers are going to more of a specific installation for their particular project. So submitting those site plans to us are very important. We'll review and help those. Those are developed by the CSIs, charge station installers, as we call them. They'll develop those site plans for your review. And then we really rely on those contractors to really bring these projects from start to finish for you, be turnkey, be able to help you. A lot of these contractors, we understand that, some of these other third-party funding requirements can be confusing. There's different eligibilities for different programs, both with the utility, the state, and some of the federal money that's available. So those contractors really, they do this every day, and they can really help us get those generations in, but also, help the customers, with filling out some of those other applications and give you some guidance on the best way to do that. So I think I have one more slide here with just some more information, with some links and some websites. We can go to the next slide, and some contact information if you have any other specific questions here. Oh, maybe we'll save that one for later. It didn't make it in, so apologies about that. So I'll hand it back over to Anna, and she'll talk about some of the federal tax credits for charging. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sean. This slide will go relatively quickly. This is just a heads up that there is a federal tax credit for installing charging, both for individuals and for commercial entities. And again, commercial entities includes tax exempt entities, thanks to exempt pay or direct pay. For individuals, the amount is 30% of the cost, not to exceed $1,000. For commercial entities, it depends. So it is 30% of the cost, unless you are a property subject to depreciation, in which case it's 6%. But if you are a property subject to depreciation and you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, then you're eligible to receive the full 30% tax credit anyway. For both individuals and commercial entities, there's a very big caveat here, which is that the location must be in a rural or low income area to qualify. And this is using federal definitions, not the state environmental justice definition. So there's a link that we've hyperlinked on these slides and can share after the webinar, where you can plug in an address and see whether it meets one of those two requirements. Most of Greater Boston is definitely not considered rural, but may be considered low income. So it is useful to go check that link. to see if you qualify. But this is an incentive that you can stack on top of the utility or Mass EVIP incentives, because it's a tax credit, not a rebate or a grant or anything like that. So definitely something to keep in mind if you're thinking about installing charging. And then I think the next slide was also me, which was just a quick plug that if you are, sorry, could we go to the next slide, please? If you are trying to figure out how to increase EV adoption in your community, installing EV charging in public places so that people have access to charging is definitely a big piece of that, but really community education is key. We do a lot of different ride and drive events or EV showcases or webinars like this. I think somebody in the chat mentioned, like, this is really complicated. Can't we make this simpler? And that making federal tax credits simpler is a thing that should happen, but definitely beyond my pay grade. So what we can do more locally is make lots more opportunities to do that education, and particularly peer-to-peer education of like actual people who have gotten electric cars who can say, like, this is why I got this car and this is why I like it. And yes, I can drive to see my grandmother in New Hampshire or whatever it is. So if anybody is interested in that, please don't hesitate to reach out, because we'd love to do more of this across the state. And I think with that, I'll pass it on to whoever is next. I don't actually know.
So this is going to be the open discussion. So again, just on the last comment that Anna made, and and John, thank you for the question, because I think it is an important one. This is exactly why we're doing this webinar. So much information, and how do we organize it? When we were meeting on Friday, we had it all coming up together, and it's like, no, let's just do charging stations separately. It is a lot, but as we peel it back and wanting to, again, as we go back to the quality of life of our communities and of our Commonwealth, these are important actions to take forward, to go forward. And now we have these contacts. So before we get into the other questions, we have everybody's contact. Everybody should have. I'm the person who needs to have another cup of coffee. So I was sending it to the panelists, all your contacts, but Elise from the office, along with Megan, has put it to everyone. So all of their contact information, their email, their phone numbers, that's the most important piece that we want to make sure that we get to you. Because having access, not to us, having access to the panelists who've been on. So, I think that, I don't know, I don't see any raised hands from anybody in attendance if there are any additional questions. But OCPC's goal for today is, again, we're going to have a page on our website. It's just a source, a place saying, because we held this, there are these slides. We will be sending these slides out to you. I think that part is important for the contact. But it really is a conversation as a community. Whether you're a planner, as in Val Massard from the town of Kingston, or whether you are a stakeholder of any of our communities, or we're someone who's interested in not only the tax rebate part of it, but really making a difference. So I know we're a bit ahead of schedule, which is always encouraged, but any panelists that you want to say any last minute? I did make Lisa Sullivan, I think I'm making Lisa Sullivan a panelist. Lisa is the regional coordinator for Green Communities. And just again, I know I did a little bit of a shout out to her, but I don't know if Lisa, if you want to add anything that we might have missed from your perspective. I know your contact is in there. Maybe even just unmute yourself and just say hello would be great too.
Sorry, Mary, my computer went blank while I was being promoted. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks for recognizing me. I'm available if anyone has any questions. I serve 85 cities and towns, and Zach and Paul did a great job, as did our members of the utilities, and Mark and Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know you've been doing this for 5 years, maybe 6.
5 plus.
But the communities, not just only within OCPC region, but obviously with Serpent and others. So the local contact, the regional contact, the municipal contact, the state contact, we have federal contact. I have an attendee who has a question. Let me see who that is. Audrey, if you would like to ask your question.
Yeah, so I work for a regional planning agency, and one of my municipalities said that it was actually the cost from the third party implementation of the charger itself. That was one of the greatest costs, and I was wondering, she tried to use the green community funds and wasn't able to. I was wondering how to kind of mitigate that from happening in the future, if that makes sense.
Audrey, was that town or city? Was it in one of the utilities jurisdictions, or was it a municipal lighting plant?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. What would be the
Gotcha.
difference?
Well, you can only take you can only take use of the utilities programs if you fall within one of the utilities jurisdictions. So if it was municipal lighting plant, you wouldn't be able to use the utility programs, which could cover a large portion of that cost.
Gotcha, thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Audrey. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Or maybe if there was something that one of the other panelists did not cover?
I wanted to add just one thing in response again to the "this is complicated" comment from earlier, is that we covered a lot of applications in this webinar. We covered the, like, if you're a municipality electrifying your fleet, if you're a private company electrifying your fleet, if you're an individual electrifying your fleet. So I'm sure it was a lot because we covered all of those use cases. But if you are only currently looking at one, there is a place that you can go that will give you all the information you need. So like if you're thinking municipality, like green communities exist, DOER exists, you can go there and they can sort of hash out all those details again for you. And then if you're looking as an individual, we've got a website that can help you. And if you're, for whatever reason, trying to support a private fleet, like there's resources for there too. So I hope that some of the complicatedness of it can be dispelled just by realizing that depending on what track you're on, like there are steps, there are places, there are resources that can help you walk through all of this, that you don't need to know all of this. You just need to know that it's out there to look for, but like people can hand that information to you.
No, that's a really good point, Anna. And again, the intention of today was really trying to kind of separate that web and to have some discussion. You know, if there's a need to have continual, like this, so this is being recorded. This will be shared on our website. This will be shared with the panelists, certainly to dissect that. But most important piece walking away is grabbing everybody's contact information who's on here, having that conversation. And continually to use that. So OCPC will continue to have the dialogue. If we need to even do something a little bit more fun and get some electric vehicles and have some folks drive them and really kind of do the test drive of them, you know, we'll do whatever we need to really kind of get that conversation going. So I do not see any other hand risen at this point. And to the panelists, I think what I'd like to do, we never end on time, by the way, but this is always great. I think that comes with some great preparation as planners, as well as for people who just care about the community. So to the panelists, thank you. I just want to give a special shout out to Elise and Megan on the team, as well as to Paul Umano. Miracle workers on a Monday morning to have everything all come together. But you know, Paul Umano again is our contact for green communities and working with obviously the state and the funding, and we look forward to the continued conversation. So thank you everybody and have a great day.